more chat before we go into it anyway. Let's settle in and run through some info, and then hopefully we'll have some time to chat. So tonight's workshop is a little bit of a hybrid of one that we originally created a couple of years ago called Hope for Recovery. And it was a program that we made while we were trying to socialise circles of support, which was originally created for family and kin of people who experience co-occurring substance use issues and mental health issues. But it's actually, the workshop's actually really valuable in lots of ways, and it, like everything we do, it's evolved. And so our workshop tonight starts from the basis of Hope for Recovery, but moves into more of a presentation of evidence-based information that we explore in all of our peer programs, regardless of whether they're for individuals who have their own issues or families and kin, because they're on their own journey to coping, and a lot of the same skill building applies to them, as well as the individuals that we work with who have their own issues. So I'm calling it a hybrid workshop. But let me begin by acknowledging the traditional owners where we're meeting today. So as I understand it, the Jarwin, Dagaman and Waterman peoples, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, emerging and future, and acknowledge all of any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in attendance today. And we also, as a peer-operated or a lived experience-operated organisation, it's important for us to recognise individual lived experiences and experiences providing love and support to a family member or friend who experiences issues related to mental health, trauma, suicidality, addiction, and all the intersections that go with that. And that our voices are really important to shaping the system and trying to address some of the fragmentation and gaps in the system. And the programs, I guess, that we've developed as a network really draw on the strength of lived experience to the programs are by community, for community. They apply evidence-based information, but we have between us enormous amounts of our own lived expertise. So we benefit from learning from each other, and it's strengthening to actually realise that through some of these experiences of adversity, we can help others as well. So if there's an emergency, we will all move together, find a patch of grass away from where the emergency is. And if you're not already aware, the bathrooms are follow where the flies are coming in, just head out the door and just to your right. So I did have a bit of a chat before and introduce myself. And I'm going to allow Bronwyn a little bit of time. So it's important for Bronwyn to introduce herself. But just in terms of, you heard a bit about my background and, trained doing different things. And I have both individual, quite complex experiences of mental health, suicidality back to childhood, and my own issues related to alcohol use, but I'm also a family member of someone who has quite complex experiences with mental health and has, I guess, a long term relationship with substances, and he's NDIS plan nominee, and we're from this very large neurodivergent autistic family, so that's another thread that runs through our story. So I guess I'm an advocate, a parent advocate as well, because my children are neurodivergent and I have my own neurodivergence. But look, I wouldn't want to be any other way, despite the challenges I've experienced. I get a lot out of what I do, and wouldn't have changed my vocation otherwise. I'm quite a cranky advocate, but I'm absolutely passionate, and the peer work, I think, is the peer work is just such a beautiful way of working with people to offset some of the frustrations around how the system operates. we're going to see through the presentation some footage of Sal, Sam and Rock, who are three of our Darwin-based advocates who've come through our peer pathway and have all been facilitators of our program and all worked at the network at some point in time as well. But they'll introduce themselves, but I'll let Bronwyn say a couple of words.
Yeah. So one of probably a lot of people that spent a lot of years knowing what knowledge I think it when you realise didn't know enough about mental health things. And then it was probably because I started to see my children like struggling with things, and I started to quite always being like you can't spend some time whatever. Because I always want to yeah, I knew there was something, yeah. Anyway, in my later life, I was diagnosed with ADHD, which helped, but also anxiety, depression along the way. And my children all have different things, which I'm glad that I knew about myself. Luckily for me, I don't feel a stigma say for me, like I'm not that's not military though, I'm still, but like, I guess I'm okay with accepting me as me, but it gets harder when like I see my children trying to struggle with it. And yeah, so I just researched over the years for me, my children, and then I found peer work and I was just like, oh wow, this is it. Because I've always learned so much and curious topics and then trying to figure it out and all those kind of things and to actually feel like there's places where I fit and where I can still useful because I know I've got value and I know I've got brains that like sometimes can't get there and it feels like it's just me and now I know it's not just me and that there's many, many people that have these experiences and they come off with all these different looking lives that stigmatise stuff like that. But if you read it back, it's just like the whole there's actually for everybody there's a value work, has something to offer, even just obstacles with all like challenges along the way, but we just find them find our strengths, find our values, and go from there. And I enjoy it.
Awesome. Thank you, Bronwyn. All right. So just to give you a bit of an overview of what we're doing tonight. And I haven't timed it, and in my usual practice, I've thrown a lot of slides together kind of and shuffled it at the last minute. So, but I'm going to introduce our network, allow our advocates to introduce themselves, and then we're going to talk through a couple of the evidence-based models that are important in our actual peer programs that we deliver. They're unpacked at a much gentler rate than what we'll cover them tonight. Like we're not doing any of the adult learning through discussion. It's more of information sharing and watching some of our advocates speak from their experience. But so those models will include understanding risk factors, why some of us are more at risk for developing mental health or issues related or related issues or substance use issues. Understanding recovery, what the research says about that and what helps recovery, the stages of change model. What's really important is the role of families, and when, particularly when we're running workshops that where we're trying to draw a lot of professionals in the room, we really try and push that point, because when families are supported, then the actual burden to the entire mental health system is reduced. And as a person who came from, the whole reason I ended up in this sector is because I happened to come across during Schizophrenia Awareness Week, a little station in the supermarket, and I had no idea that there was anything out there for families, and my own exposure to service providers was the clinicians at the secure ward where my brother was. So there was kind of like no information or support provided to us, and I think it changed the trajectory for our whole family, which was on the point of, I would say, complete fracture, which would have been catastrophic for my brother, absolutely, as well as other individuals in the family. So we we strongly advocate that families need their own support and peer groups as well as individuals. But so we'll talk about our particular programs, and then we'll finish off with some videos from our advocates. And I know I'm talking about them a lot, but you'll feel like you know them by the end of it. They've been very generous sharing their lived experience to create these videos. So just in terms of our safety in the room, what I like to say is there are a number of things that we can do to make this a safe space. We don't necessarily know each other, but if we work from a position of not making assumptions about each other's lived experiences, of just communicating in ways that are respectful and not stigmatizing, and so we're gentle to each other, but what is also important is that we're very gentle with ourselves. I mean, that's the motivation for us to come here, is to tonight and learn a bit more about lived experience and what helps. So yeah, take time out if you need it. I think this is all also lived experience spaces are also, in my experience, very safe spaces, and it's really important for us to cultivate safety, even in workshops as opposed to peer programs. So please do be gentle with yourself and gentle and respectful toward others. So we as a network actually emerged in 2020, and there was a 2.5-year pilot project that operated out of Darwin, and there was another one, a smaller project that was operating out of Alice Springs. And what happened was, through those two projects, pockets of the lived experience community were actually empowered. And so the network formed with the purpose of trying to create actually a collective and independent and a purely lived experience representative voice, the type of voice and representative body that exists all around Australia, except in the Northern Territory. And so as we became empowered through those pilot projects, Territorian lived experience workers, of which I was one and had been working for, I think, about 4 years at that time, that was actually the first opportunity we ever had to have access to training. Whereas that sort of training was like the cert forum peer work or some other kind of training was fairly standard in other states and territories. And it was through doing that training, which was run by Teams or Zoom or something, and only because on the back of COVID, that was the only reason that RTO did it, that we learned a lot about our rights and about our role in system decision making. And we were a little bit furious. And we were like, well, I'm assuming that many of the decision makers here knew that these bodies exist in other places, and they know they have a responsibility to engage with our community. So why isn't that happening? So anyway, we brought the network together. Stronger together is a big philosophy of what we do. It's hard to be an advocate in isolation. So as a collective, we're able to kind of back each other a little bit, which is, can make you feel a little bit more courage and a little bit braver. All of our advocacy is still unfunded, although we do, as much as possible, use our volunteer time, skills and knowledge to do surveys, to do consultations, to write submissions, to national consultations, to contribute to issues in the Northern Territory, like the review of the Act and that sort of thing. But we have had the opportunity to grow, and that's by virtue of having peer leaders, because we came out of these peer projects and included some of the first trained Northern Territory peer workers. And so we've been and have always been very diligent applying for grant funding. We don't have poor ongoing funding, but we work very closely with Flinders University so that each of our pilots is evaluated, and we've got the evidence to justify subsequent writing for funding. So the opportunities that we have in Katherine are all, I guess, discrete pilot funding projects, and we're still moving toward hopefully one day being in a position somewhere in the Northern Territory to have continuity of income so that we can offer permanent positions to our workforce. But anyway, as part of our suite of programs, we've developed a series of workshops just like this, and that helps us to connect with community, broader community. It helps us to connect with people with lived experience who might want to know a bit more about us and what we have to offer, but don't want to necessarily be open about their lived experience yet. And the workshops also enable us to share lived experience perspectives with workforce, so that's enriching the work that they do, supporting our community as well. And over the last couple of years, since 2022 or 2021, we've actually developed a series of specific peer programs. And the first is, actually, it was the last one that was developed. The first one we developed was the Empowering Youth Program, which is for neurodivergent young people or young people who've experienced adversity. The second one we received some funding to create was Circles of Support, the program for family and kin. And then we finally got some money to create the type of program that empowered us in the first place, and that's Recovery Together, because most of us have our own individual lived experience. Quite a large proportion of us have both individual lived experience and experience being an advocate or carer or supporter for a family member. And then we have probably, to a far lesser extent, a few people who identify strongly as very much a care advocate on behalf of their loved ones. So I've got a slide which shows a bit more about our lived experiences coming up. But we've also developed the first, we've also been driving the professionalisation of the peer workforce. So with the support of allies, we got the first funding to deliver the Cert 4 in peer work. All right, and as I said, we partner with Flinders University. There's a fair bit of scepticism, particularly in the NT, where there hasn't been a wide utilisation of the peer workforce. So it's really important that we justify the value of what we're doing. So I think about our programs and the type and the people and their lived experience of who have come and connected with us through our programs. There is this high rate of co-occurrence. Not everyone, but we do support a large portion of people who have co-occurring mental health and alcohol and drug issues. And alcohol, I would say, particularly because it's a territory and it's a very much ingrained part of the culture here, one of the biggest consumers of alcohol in the world as a jurisdiction. And of course, suicidality plays a role in that as well. And our program participants and also the people who've come through our vocational pathway are reflective of I call them pointy intersections. So they're people who are more prone to stigma and discrimination, more likely to experience trauma, more likely to fall through the gaps. And they're our LGBTIQ community, our neurodivergent community, people who have fallen through the gaps and been in the justice system, and certainly people who've had experiences of homelessness. But what is really clear is that everyone has had experiences of trauma. So it's kind of it's very much an underlying thread, or whether or not they identify it as experience of trauma, it's very highly stressful life experiences and circumstances which have impacted their ability to emotionally regulate and to cope, and maybe that's contributed to them, sometimes picking up a coping strategy that's not healthy in the long term. A little bit so this is, I guess, the STEP vocational pathway. And so the Cert 4 is considered like a leadership level in the vocational training, So the expectation, and who may have had quite unsuccessful study experiences or early workforce experiences, because adolescence and young adulthood is when mental health experiences tend to emerge. I think the expectation for people who have potentially experienced health challenges during those years, of early adulthood, late adolescence, and expect them to jump into a leadership level of vocational training is not ideal, especially if especially if their confidence has been interrupted, their ability to make money, a whole range of things by virtue of their health experience. So we, and I saw it happen firsthand with the first TAFE Wodonga. There was no kind of support. It was just kind of like floated, come and do this Cert 4. And it was kind of like a mind-boggling online system to a certain extent, and people felt unsupported and they kind of dropped out. So we've over time developed our own pathway that has like got steps in between it. Like it's not a leap and there's not like a crevasse in the middle of the leap. So, and the other thing about our pathway is it builds each step builds on the other step. So we privilege people who've come through our recovery programs, which is our peer programs, which is the first step to the vocational pathway. And then we've got a non-accredited peer work training program called Peer to Peer, which was developed by the Scottish Recovery Network, who do great work, and we've adapted it for the Northern Territory context. And then everything that's done in peer-to-peer gets mapped to those lived experience units in the Cert 4 and peer work. And then the Cert 4 and peer work, so you're not duplicating any work, the work gets mapped along the way. It's just that it's a nice little gradual stepping stone. And we start our Cert 4 training with the lived experience units because the the peer work values and the peer work lens informs how we approach all of our other learning. So our values are things like, above anything, it's hope for recovery for the people we work with. It's non-judgment, it's mutuality. So we don't work with people from an expert lens. We're not the expert in their life. We see our role as empowering them to make decisions in their own life and their own recovery. So that lens kind of informs the way we approach the units, which are about, for example, dual diagnosis, co-occurring alcohol and drug use, or our trauma-informed units. It's from that lived experience lens. And then our pathway enables our students to do their work placement hours in-house if they want to, or externally. So we will then mentor and support them to facilitate our programs. And so we kind of have this, what I see are shallower, more supported steps for people who sometimes haven't been in the workforce for a very long time, or they have a really fractured sense of identity because their experiences knock them flat on their face or their bum, that we just provide a little bit more support for them. So the original programs that we developed, as I said, Recovery Together, Circles of Support, and the Empowering Youth Program. And we have run the Empowering Youth Program in Katherine, and we tried to promote Recovery Together and Circles of Support, but we don't have the reputation and the word of mouth to leverage here that we do in Darwin. A significant, nearly all of the people who self-refer to our programs in Darwin they've spoken to someone else who's done a program, and it's that first-hand recommendation, which is why people sign up, because I've spoken to Bronwyn. Bronwyn said she really liked it. Yes, it's this number of sessions, but it's worth it, and you'll feel, and they see in others the change that comes from participating. So we understand that. Our goal here is to train local people and to keep writing for funding so there could be local people delivering our programs to local people. But we need to kind of bring people through this pathway. And we've got funding for the Cert 4. So anyway, we've also got more people who haven't done our programs, who are already working in the sector, who do have lived experience that want to do their Cert 4 and peer work. And one of the solutions to that, which is also a solution to try and get better engagement in Katherine, is our creation of the Growing Stronger program. So Growing Stronger is going to cover the key evidence-based information that is the backbone of both Recovery Together and Circles of Support, but it's not going to be at the beautiful, comfortable and gentle pace that we would do in either of those other programs. We will do active, instead of the whole group doing the same activity, we might have half the group doing a discussion related to one activity and the other half of the group doing a discussion related to a different activity, and then you will cross-share and learn. But you won't get the opportunity to do everything that you would normally do in our 10-week program. And there'll also be elements that we need to take out. But the reason that we want to do it is we just want to get some exposure in Katherine to our ways of working and to get some people to start coming through the vocational pathway. And there is no pressure for anyone who does Growing Stronger to do the vocational pathway, but that is part of our objectives in the region. So until we've done that, we're putting our longer programs, Recovery Together on and Circles of Support on hold until we can get some momentum developed in other ways. Anyway, that's a little bit about us, I think, in our suite of programs. And I'm going to play a video now. It'll be Samsal and Rocket, and they are far more interesting than me. They are talking, we made these videos to promote the Circles of Support program. I'm just going to mention this, the funding body was the Alcohol and Drug Foundation. So we had to have a really strong lens on the substance use, but these advocates all have co-occurring experiences. Oh, and that's me introducing it. What's that thing? Territory, lived experience medal. This video contains lived experience perspective of addiction and recovery, including what it's like as an individual and what it's like as a family member. Introducing Sam, Sal, and Robert.
I'm Sam. I'm currently working as a community youth activist.
Hey, I'm Sal. I'm a community engagement officer. Okay. In my 40s. And I'm a campaign and advocate coordinator for Justice Youth on this year.
The experience of addiction. What are some of the worst things you experienced as a result of your addiction?
So the worst part of my addiction was drinking, and I drank for 30 years. It wasn't always at lethal level, but at the worst part of my drinking, I drank out for 3 liters. It's like per day.
And over time, weekends, being on no stress for extended periods of time, sleeping outdoors in really bad weather, versus terribly with nothing.
It was really being hospitalised 5 times over a period of a year, and carrying several near-death experiences across the hospital.
Well, that's good. Some of those times during my addiction were when I was in jail, in high security, and through the morning, I was very suicidal and didn't have really many friends around me. Yeah, that's definitely the worst time in addiction. What are some of the factors that you think contributed to you developing an addiction?
Very hard to say because it developed so long ago. But what was contributed to getting to lethal, lethal area was lost job and isolation.
Unaddressed traumas from my childhood, I would say, having a generation where parents were being up, even though it's the best of. I was doing drugs at a really young age when someone, doing the beginning for. So I was smoking weed at the age of 6, and, for the age of 13. And I never seen drugs as being illegal. I was like, yeah, that's really stuff about health. What was it like to get your addiction?
And I felt more the addiction and started this biggest accomplishment of my life. And it was something that was quite surprising because I always thought that it would just be quite easy to give up when I went there. But it was really quite the opposite.
I set myself free. I'm no longer a slave to something that demands of me to keep me during the way. I can freedom. Yeah. I'm so proud of myself now. Like, I have some amazing friends. And like I'm living like my dream, I've got my dream job. Yeah, I love it. I love not being an addict anymore. Yeah, it's a really very good feeling. Finally meeting it. Yeah. I'm glad that I'm doing that. It's all right. It's pretty like that. Yeah.
Right. So that's Sam, Sal, and Rocket. They've all worked for us at different points in time. So the next little part that I was going to present always comes straight out of the programs that we deliver. And it's an explanation of the links or the co-occurrence. I've got it moved now. Between the experience of trauma, the development of mental health problems, and or alcohol or drug or any other, addiction or behaviour, a behaviour that's adopted to cope with big feelings, I guess. So, apologies, it's the end of the day, so I only have a certain number of words I'm allowed to talk each day before my language just flies out the window. So we include the following information as an explanation about why some of us are more at risk, and this is all evidence-based information. It's not what we've made up. So the chance of developing one of these problems basically increases when your exposure to risk factors outweighs your exposure to protective factors. There is no single reason or single collection of reasons that some people will develop one of these problems and others will not. But what we do know is when you're exposed to more risk factors and they're really outweighing the protective factors, because you can be exposed to a lot of risk factors, but if you also have a lot of protective factors around you, you're less likely to develop the problem. So it's that probability that puts you more at risk. So in our programs, we actually explore 3 different models that help us understand layers of risk, if you like. So the window of tolerance model, which I'll explain in a little bit, explains risks that are related to our direct experiences and particularly our experiences of trauma. The biopsychosocial spiritual model, which is the main way that mental health clinicians or any other medical practitioner is their, I guess, preferred way or model that's used in their language to understand risk factors. But it helps us understand a bit more about the factors that we're exposed to as an individual, but also, I guess, our immediate environment. And then there's another model called the social determinants of health, And that expands our understanding of risk to understand actually how the society in which we're born, grow, age, and we're raised actually impacts our experience of health. And that that model, the social determinants of health, which we'll look at a slide, actually accounts for about 60% of our health experience, whether it's mental health, substance use, or any health experience. So it's important for us to explore, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. But let's look at trauma in the window of tolerance. So I think most people, you may have seen something, it's called the cognitive triangle, and it says thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and it shows them in a triangle and it says that they're related. So, you know, what I think affects how I feel, and that affects how I behave, and they all bounce off from each other. But we always say it's not just our thinking, our feelings, and our behaviors, actually also our body, because you can't separate your mind, your emotions, and your nervous system from the sensations in your body. And being able to tune in to the body, particularly in relation to trauma, is really important because it helps us to recognize warning signs. So trauma, because we'll talk about it and then people will have heard the word, but they won't really understand what it means. So the way it's defined is an emotionally or physically harmful or life-threatening. And some people, as a result of experiences or multiple experiences like that, have an ongoing impact that includes being easily triggered. So, and we'll talk about a trigger in a little bit. They have difficulty regulating their emotions, can have long-term mental health problems, and are far more likely to use alcohol and drugs and at increased rates. So trauma can also be intergenerational, and our programs are not just trauma informed, which is that we try and create safe spaces so people who have experienced trauma are less impacted. We actually also, they include trauma education. So our goal is for people to understand trauma as it relates to them, because our goal is for them to have better self-awareness and ability to self-regulate. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to share what we know so that they have the tools to be more of a leader in their own experience. So that's our goal. I kind of like to think of trauma as it's not necessarily a threat to your life, but it could be like a prolonged or repeated exposure to events that make you feel powerless and out of control. And that powerlessness and lack of control places you at risk of that psychological, emotional harm. So what's a trigger? A trigger is something that basically changes those thoughts, feelings, behaviors, the things that you say and do, as well as the sensations in your body really quickly. You can have happy triggers, but we don't talk about happy triggers in our programs. We talk about the ones that have the ones that we're trying to get better control or manage for the sake of our experience. So a happy trigger would be, someone I love just tells me they're about to have their first baby, and suddenly I'm beaming and I'm alert and I'm smiling and that sort of thing. So that would be a happy trigger. A negative trigger would be, for me, because I do have PTSD, it would be probably a big loud bang behind me, because that would cause a startle, and that would quickly change or the physical sensations that I feel, the emotions. I would feel unsafe, and I would behave in a way that is seeking to understand and to feel safe. And my thoughts would be, am I safe? What's happened? So we use this little doova, which we call a brain gauge, to explain what happens when we're triggered. And it's built on what we use it to lead into Dan Siegel's hand model for the brain. Or we wouldn't, in a program, we wouldn't say, oh, Dan Siegel or the evidence where it comes from. We would just say this is evidence-based and this is where this model comes from. But anyway, I'm wandering. So if you think about the brain gauge in the green, that's when our mind is functioning well. We're able to make decisions, we're able to socialize. If we're problem solving, we're able to break that problem down into smaller steps, and we're actually able, feel good, meet the challenges with our life, get on with things. The way we want to live, it's the ideal place where we want to be, in that green zone. And if we think of, so for now, we're going to call the red and the blue zones survival mode, or flipping your lid. And the yellow zones are little windows of warning that we have before we flip our lid and move into that survival zone. So we like to, in our programs, talk about the brain gauge in relation to the tachometer on the car. And I don't know, every time I say this, people think I'm making it up. Tachometer is the number of revs in your car. I think there's just so many people who drive automatics now, they forget to look at the tachometer to know when to change the gears before the revs get up to the red line. Anyway, so if we think about the red zone as our car being at full revs, and the red zone represents fight, flight, panic, or meltdown. So the terms meltdown and shutdown are used a lot by the autistic or the neurodivergent community, but they're representative of the same experience that's happening in the nervous system when you're in red zone. So, and then the blue zone is also a survival state, or also flipping your lid, but our response in our nervous system is different. So instead of our tachometer being on full revs and flooding our body with all these messages through our nervous system, our tachometer's gone and stalled, and there's pretty much no messages running through our nervous system, and so we're very spacey. We might dissociate. We might struggle to understand what's being said to us, lose our ability to communicate. For neurodivergent or autistic people, that's a common experience. If they hit a shutdown, their response in their brain is so extreme that their language skills diminish significantly in a shutdown or a meltdown. So I don't want to swear, but I'm bastardizing the normal explanation a little bit, and I apologize, and I hope you're following along. But we use Dan Siegel's hand model for the brain to understand a little bit more about what happens in the brain when we flip our lid, why we use that word, flip our lid, and what's happening in our nervous system. So Dan Siegel I can't remember, he's a psychologist or someone who's famous. He made this model to help even little children understand what happens when they have a meltdown or a shutdown. And so if you think about your brain as your hand, and if you think about this part, the upper part of your brain, where you do your thinking and your socializing and your problem solving, if that's represented by your fingers, and then the lower part of the brain, the ancient part of the brain, the limbic region, is represented by your thumb. And normally that limbic region is deep inside the brain, and it's responsible for instinct. It's responsible for the red zone and the blue zone, the fight-flight response. It's the reason humans weren't made extinct by, I don't know, what were the saber-toothed tigers or whatever the predators were. It's the reason we run away, and we were able to do things without thinking about them to stay alive. So it's where the fight response comes from, where the flight response comes from. I'm not sure what bloody purpose panic has, but yeah. So when the other part of this is the brainstem and the spinal cord, which is where you're and all of the nervous system, which is coming out of your brain. So when you're in the green zone and your mind is calm and you're able to do that socializing and problem solving and all of those things, then your brain looks like this. Your upper brain and your lower brain or your limbic brain, they're talking to each other. And so we don't have this little one, this limbic brain driving our whole response. But what happens when we start to get triggered, and often this yellow zone, this warning zone is it's quite quick, and people will say there is no warning zone. I just lose my mind immediately, but there is always a little warning zone. So in the yellow zone, we're just starting to have a disconnect between our upper brain and our limbic region. And that is the one, if we're able to tune into the type of sensations we're having in our body, the type of things we're starting to say and do, maybe some of the emotions, and if we're have good awareness of our self-talk, maybe some of the things we're thinking. So being able to name your emotions is not a great skill that people in the lived experience community often have. And being able to notice your thoughts is also not a great skill. But nearly all of us, and especially small children, can tune into physical changes. So that's why that part of the, the thing, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, body is really important, because we can notice things like muscle tension and a sick feeling in our gut. And the other thing we are sometimes, which we can be good at noticing, is, for example, if my pattern is to move into fight, do I notice that I'm starting to puff up? Do I notice that I'm starting to swear? Or if my pattern is to move into flight, or my pattern is panic. So do I notice that my brain is actually whipping up like that, and I'm kind of turning into a bit of a tornado in my head? Or if the other thing,
I'm not like,
yeah. So anyway, so if we can tune in just in that, I need it to shut down before I wake it up again. If we can tune in while we're here, before we do that, that's the goal, right? When we've still got a little bit of a connection between our upper brain and our middle brain, because if we're still in that yellow zone, then we can do the things that we know will help bring us back to the green zone, which is self-regulation, right? Otherwise, we flip fully, we risk, and if we have a pattern, like you have a pattern for panic attacks, or you have a pattern for losing your lolly and getting into fights, or running away and slamming the door, then we're not going to be able to be in control of our responses. Things may happen that get us in trouble with the law. It feels terrible, because when you flip your lid like that and you go into a full fight, flight, panic, or shutdown, then you've got all this cortisol flooding your body. When that happens multiple times a day, a person, it's not a good place to exist in terms of your mental health and well-being. And we'll talk about the relationship that happens later, that people often turn to the use of alcohol or drugs because it makes them less likely to do this. Fuzzes that edge between the blue zone and the
what causes the yucky feelings from remembering.
correct. Yeah. Yeah. So at the end, I don't know if I've done this correctly. So we talk about hand model for the brain. We've got a little brains, tachometer. Red is when our body's getting flooded with messages from our nervous system. Blue is when we're on a bit of a stall. Then we bring in the window of tolerance. And the window of tolerance, the only, what it represents is, oh, you can't see that.
So you realise it's not.
No, don't you? So what the window of tolerance does, it just shows how our little needle gauge would move through the day. So we explain this even to adolescents when we're running our Empowering Youth program, and particularly our neurodivergent or our autistic young people who might have sensory sensitivities and social burdens, they will know exactly. We'll put we'll put a picture like that up and we'll get them to draw, and they'll draw a line and they go, this is what it's like when I'm getting ready for school. This is what it's like when I get to school and I have that first meltdown, and then I'm exhausted, and then I come home, and then blah, 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 blah. They can relate very quickly to the window of time, see how that represents how they move between these kind of, states of dysregulation is what they are. So a person who has experienced trauma, now remember, a person who experiences trauma is under a lot of stress. They're more likely to have this dysregulation and go into this red and blue. So the reason why we talk about this with people in our programs is because the experience of trauma is so common. Or even if you think about families who are they might be under a fair bit of stress because they've got a family member who, has big complex mental health experiences and they're unable to get support, then they're also they can also feel quite out of control and volatile in their emotional response as well. So ultimately, I haven't got the slide there, but what we do in the first session of our programs is we do these brainstorming conversations, and we break into table groups and we say, let's brainstorm what those thinking, feelings, those things that we say and do, our behaviors, those sensations in the body, what does that feel like before we're about to go into the red zone? So we'll do that. And then not as many people have the experience of dissociation, but there's normally 1 or 2 people in a group. And so we'll do the same brainstorm for what it's like to go into the blue zone. But then importantly, what we do is we brainstorm what are people's strategies that they use to prevent themselves from that happening. So how do they regulate? And so they'll talk about, I'll go for a walk, I'll take a break, I'll splash my face, I'll take my shoes off, I'll do grounding, I'll listen to music. Like it's that sharing a lived experience knowledge. And so we actually do that in the first session of recovery together. So because people come in quite anxious already because they don't know each other, but we want them to have permission to do what they need to do to stay calm and regulate during the program. That picture there just represents, why we want to regulate, and it's just a visual representation of not hitting the red zone or not hitting the blue zone. This is the impact of trauma or constant stress. It narrows our green zone. So those things that we would normally be able to cope with, we're less able to cope with. And one of the easiest ways to understand this is to think if I've had a good night's sleep versus if I've had no sleep, and what it would be like for me in the morning. For example, if I've got kids, well, I'll give you my example. If I've got kids I need to get off to school, and one's not, is just, not coming to the party about getting ready and having breakfast. And I've also got to get to work and I'm worried about being at work for a meeting. My emotional regulation after having a really poor night's sleep to that sort of situation would be a lot like that narrow green zone, and I would more likely to hit the red zone. So this is what the impact of trauma will do, or just that experience of being under constant stress. But the good news is, and this is what we say, so through the recovery processes and principles and all the discussions that we have in the program, in all of our programs, our whole goal is for our participants to develop their own strategies which help to widen their window of tolerance. That's one way of considering the benefits of learning about this model. And then, so your life is you're not sentenced to a life sentence just because you have an experience of a trauma, or like me, live with quite complex PTSD or that sort of thing, because we'll talk about in a little bit is recovery is living your best life. It's not living a life without symptoms. It's like living a life as you would with any other health condition. How do you manage it? How do you get on with it? How do you still live with have your hopes, dreams, goals, and this has a minimal impact on your life? Because not all of us are going to be fortunate to, have one episode of depression or whatever. Some of us have very complex experiences. Well, this is just another one of the models that the biopsychosocial spiritual model, the one that clinicians like to understand, how some other risks that are not trauma related can increase our likelihood of developing a mental health condition or a drug or alcohol problem. So, it considers risks in terms of these four overlapping domains: biological, body, psychological, mind and coping, social environment, interactions with other human beings, interactions with the environment I live in, and then spiritual. So there's just some examples up here. So having a family history, I mean, clearly in my that's a thing for me. We have quite a few in the cousin collective that I'm in who've had experiences of psychosis far more than the rest of the population. Having an injury or an illness, so it's high rates of people who have diabetes or who have heart conditions, or they have higher rates of depression, anxiety, etc. And then, of course, being bullied, not having the opportunity to learn healthy coping strategies, being subject to discrimination, being excluded from your faith, disconnection from land. There's heaps of reasons. And a lot of the reasons you can move into different parts of that model. All right, and that's why those domains are drawn overlapping. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but we do talk about social determinants of health in our program. One of the biggest reasons we do it is because we have such diverse communities or diverse people in the Northern Territory. And the last thing we want is our participants to discriminate against each other. So we talk about the social determinants of health so that people can understand why particular populations have poorer experiences of health than others. So I'll leave to save time, because I would like to just you to hear more from Sam, Sal and Rocket than from me. So I just don't want to get bogged down on the details. But what we do know is studies related to the social determinants of health is that so that's the policy, even the way the effectiveness of the government, which is driven by how much community cares about each other, because governments get voted in based on election commitments. And then those election commitments turn into policies and that sort of thing. So community drives what happens in an election and then what happens during the next term. And that impacts the environment in which we're born and raised and grow. But the World Health Organization's done some studies around that, and they know that those factors make up for 60% or more of your experience of health, more so than things like your genetics, whether you exercise, what you eat, and that sort of thing. Look, I've spent 10 minutes talking, maybe more, talking about some of the risk factors. We tell people that the reason we include it in the program is that we want people to have compassion for their experience and to recognise really a lot of the risk factors are outside of their control. And what we find is for a lot of people, the risk factors they were exposed to actually occurred when they were young people as well. But we take care not to spend too much time looking at those models, because it cultivates a feeling of helplessness, because we weren't in control of our circumstances at that time. Another thing we do, and that's important for us to say, is just how common the experience of mental health conditions are. 2 out of every 5 people during their lifetime. the most common mental health conditions are depression, anxiety, and substance use. And substance use includes alcohol use, and that makes up about 80% of all substance uses. And the experience of trauma has a very high association with the development of mental health conditions and the use of substances, which can evolve into substance use disorder. We talk about the concept of self-medication as a way, it's not a good thing, not medicine in a good way, but it is a behaviour that people will turn to help them cope with emotional pain. And it's temporarily relieving the distress of being outside your window of tolerance that can lead to long-term issues. And we've got permission from another Scottish National Education unit to share some of their animations about how substance use impact brain function. So some coping behaviours, including substance use, release dopamine, which improves mood. Stress increases our need for dopamine and cravings. As tolerance for a drug increases, the amount we need to get the same lift in mood increases. And at that point, people start to take more and more to avoid withdrawal symptoms. And the impact is that our other ways of coping, or our brain's propensity to move to those other ways of coping, weakens. So we're drawn back to the substance more because that gives us the strongest and most motivating reward. And then our brain circuits kind of become wired or pulled toward the use of the substance. And that can include our brain circuits that normally help us with longer term thinking and planning. So they say if we think back to the window of tolerance, if we're in the red zone, it's difficult to plan ahead, to problem solve and to override impulses. And if we're in the blue zone, it's very difficult to experience motivation and energy to change. And that's why people with PTSD have a more sensitive stress response and are especially vulnerable to the cycle. And they may want to get better very much, but those brain circuits make it really difficult and can leave people feeling stuck. And that means we might drop out of treatment, miss appointments, or go back to using substances for immediate relief. So a little bit of hopefulness now, recovery, which is the whole point of our programs. So the clinical approach to recovery is really about treating symptoms or removing symptoms. And if you look at the origins of that through history, it goes back to the medical paradigm. But the internationally accepted definition for recovery is that, or this is the first internationally accepted definition, is that it's a deeply personal, unique process of changing your attitudes, feelings, goals, skills, and roles as a way of living a satisfying, hopeful, and contributing life, even within the limitations of illness. It's living your best life at the end of the day. So in our programs, and in front of you, there's an example of the blue scrapbook. So we do, and there's, Bronwyn, maybe you want to take that one up there as well, have a bit of a look through the resource. So we use a lot of imagery to create shared language around concepts and also to start discussions. So one of the key activities in our program is, and it's actually what recovery means to us, and this is part of our recovery education, if you like, before we start unpacking recovery and what helps recovery in detail. So people, and I think you might be on the correct page there, or you might, yeah. Does that say what recovery means for me? Yeah. So people pick, we put out a whole heap of pictures, and they'll pick pictures, and we'll ask them what recovery, to glue it in their book and what recovery means for them. And then we ask them to share it with the rest of the group, and we write down the key things that they say. And then we group from what everyone in the group says, we kind of pull together the repeated themes, and we take that and we put it in a word wall generator. So we actually, for every group that we run, we make a word wall of what recovery means to the group. So the bigger the words are there, that's the more times it was mentioned by members in the group. And then we do this before we actually present them what the research says about recovery, because the research always reflects what our groups have said. So we've got about 10 of these or more now, or maybe 10 to 12 word walls about what our groups have said recovery means for them. And every one of them features words like journey, takes time, has ups and downs, been about learning, sometimes acceptance. They talk about supportive of family or peers, or so you see there are these recurrent kind of themes come through. If we go back, so there was a really important paper that was published by Mary Leamy in 2011 that kind of changed the whole landscape for how recovery-oriented services were delivered. And in that paper it had, so Mary and the team actually, they did this really comprehensive literature review. They looked at every single paper, journal paper, where there was narratives of people talking about their recovery, not clinicians talking about recovery, but people talking quoted their own words quoted about their recovery. And they reviewed every bit of narrative that was published, and they came up with 13 characteristics for recovery. And then they came up with, I think it was about 26 enablers for recovery. So if we have a look at the characteristics, so what I've done is when we present them to groups, we've taken them out of academic language and we've just put them in everyday language. And I've also changed 13 to 12 because it looks better on the slide. But so this is what the research says. It's different for everyone. It is a journey and it does have ups and downs. It takes time and it happens in stages. It will take trial and error for you to find what works for you. But you, as can I, we can learn from others and we can learn from the research too. It involves changes in different areas of our lives. It requires you to be active, to be the leader in your own recovery. It can happen without a cure. Having supportive people helps. Being a healing environment helps. It's life-changing, and it's about living your best life. So some of these characteristics about recovery are reflected then on the enablers for recovery. So can you see here how the research is reflecting what our people have said, particularly the ups and downs, the journey part, having the supportive people. Trial and error is often reflected through, they'll say things like learning. I had to learn what worked for me, that sort of thing. Self-acceptance, self-love, self-compassion, they're huge themes that come through.
I see I've gone through and had to learn that's part of the process. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if you saw in there's a Kintsugi activity with the gold paper. I think it's toward the front. So that's an activity where we're trying to cultivate self-acceptance and self-love, because we're noticing that there's more than just these really challenging experiences that we've had. There's actually a lot of growth that's come through the experience as well. So, and then, because we very much try and create visual resources. Oh, that's the other thing. So the yellow folder has got an example of what the notes look like. So you'll see there behind, if you want to have a flick through. So like everyone, the very first versions of the program were like very quite text-based, and they were heavily referenced because we felt like we needed to justify which part of the research a model came from. But now we break everything down as much as possible into everyday language. That's some of the older stuff in that one there. Break it down into everyday language, and we try and make it visually engaging. And the purpose of those scrapbooks particularly is we want people to open them up later. So if they're not like a photo album that a person feels a connection to, they're not going to look at them. So that's what, and you know, there's also the way of just using imagery to explore concepts.
I did enjoy all the picture parts because it's like what's bringing me to find a picture, and I kind of and I did have something to look at and feel and focus on and see, and I felt like I was getting more in touch with myself through the images. I was surprised actually how much it was good for me. I liked it.
Well, yeah, someone said it actually invokes a future hopeful part of your brain, the creative part of your brain, which is it's really supportive for recovery. So this is a really strong message. You have to, it's not about all we're doing is sharing. For you, there's nothing, your benefit from attending the program will come from you being empowered and you applying what you've learned. So that the other really important part of that research paper by Leamy was the CHIME model for recovery. So these were I don't know if there's 26, maybe there's 22 and I can't count, I don't know, whatever. These were, when they looked at what everyone said and they pulled out this is what the people said best enabled them to achieve recovery. And the ones that are in blue, let me take a step back. CHIME stands for connectedness, hope, identity, meaning, and empowerment. And they're drawn overlapping like that because it's hard to separate one from the other. But those lines of text underneath, they're the themes that Leamy discovered people were saying and were repeated in their stories about what helped them to recover. And they're things like peer support and going to support groups, having good interpersonal relationships, receiving support from others and being part of a community. So that they were the themes that fell under connectedness. So hope, it's belief in the possibility for recovery. It's not believing I'm going to recover. It's often just the possibility that something is different because people, honestly, they can feel quite dashed. It's being motivated for change, having hope, inspiring relationships, having aspirations, and even knowing it's a good thing to have aspirations and goals instead of being told, oh, no, you can't do this or you can't do that. And it's, as well as having dreams and aspirations yourself, rebuilding, redefining your sense of identity, overcoming stigma, there being aspects to you, dimensions of identity, making meaning of your experiences, spirituality, quality of life, having a meaningful life and social goals and roles, and rebuilding your life, and empowerment. So having personal responsibility and control over your life and being able to focus on strengths. So the blue, I just want to point out the blue, those themes, personal responsibility and control over life, they were said by 91% of people. They are the strongest enablers for recovery. So, and then the purple were the second strongest enablers for recovery. And so if you think about some of our comrades who have really complex health experiences and do spend time in hospital where they often do have their decision-making taken away from them, what's really important and what our system could do much better is the returning of that control over life and personal responsibility. Because yes, sometimes some of us need to go to hospital because, we might be so unwell that we can't see a way past it and so we're at risk of harm to ourselves. But it's that as a person becomes well, it's that returning of control over life and having responsibility instead of being cotton-wooled. But that's actually really important for recovery.
I can't see that empowerment at the whole.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm going to give you the hope because I was thinking the same. You hope that I'm sure the environment will come.
Going at that time to
So this is this is where peers actually have a really important role. It's the most evaluated workforce of any of the mental health workforces. If you think about a peer, what are they doing? Their pure existence in the sector is your visible role model that recovery is a reality. That's what you are. You don't even have to say anything. You acknowledge that you've had a lived experience, and maybe that lived experience involves something very similar. Whereas if I wasn't a peer and I was telling you that you could do it because I had a friend whose neighbour did it too, it's a bit different to sitting there in a room with someone who maybe just like you had had gone through something very similar and devastating. And then the other things that peers do is, and this is, where do I say? We do activities through the Cert 4, don't we? We call it strength spotting. We train peers to look for strengths in people's stories and to reflect them back at them. So not kind of, you'll be right and I got over it, but hearing their story and noticing the strength, even in the really tough parts of the story, and then reflecting them back to the person, because our goal is to empower them. It's a little bit, it's quite a different frame of reference. If you think about clinicians, their job is actually to look for symptoms. It's a deficit focused approach, and then to treat symptoms which are treated as deficits. Our job is to look for strengths, even during the periods of unwellness, and to kind of try and build up those strengths to empower that person, knowing that empowerment is a really strong recovery indicator. So
I know you're probably on the way you talk to one, but I do just want to say that for me, I remember one stage where all I had is I realised I've never given up. Gone through ridiculous times where it's been, but love's not terrible for it. And I've never given up. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. There, and then it's okay, that's good. And then build from there. Yeah.
yeah. So I think there's a slide coming up and it says we start with what's strong, not what's wrong. And we do that in the programs too. And the evaluations of the programs have shown, particularly some of the men who have come through the justice system in the rehab, and they're saying in the eval, I thought I would be forced to talk about what I went through, and I didn't want to sit there and go through that shame again. There's no requirement to share that. We're starting from a position of strength, and we're trying to help people sort of strengthen up who they want to be. Yeah. So look, these are the CHI model for recovery is really important. The other one that is just as important, particularly in the context of the Northern Territory, is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander social and emotional wellbeing model. And then if we flip that biopsychosocial spiritual risk model on its head, we can turn it into a model to understand protective factors instead of risk factors. And we do that. We call it body, mind, spirit, and the world around us. But so these are our three evidence-based models, I guess, that we can use to explore other ways to promote mental health and well-being out in non-clinical ways. But if you look at them, there are multiple ways that they overlap. So you'll see by the colours here. So you can see how many parts of them overlap. And it's actually the social and emotional wellbeing model, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander model, that hits most of the regions. So if you consolidated those regions across those models, there's like 9 areas that we know from the research that if we make positive changes in those areas of our life, we're in a position to best facilitate our own recovery. And the social and emotional wellbeing model hits 7 of them. The only one it doesn't explicitly address is the hope and possibilities for the future and the empowerment. But the whole model is around self-determination anyway. So, and then the yellow just shows where our chime comes in over the top. Look, there's a model that's called Stages of Change, which is about making behaviour change. It's often presented as a wheel. As a lived experience community, we don't think that's very hopeful because it doesn't show you ever getting off the and being able to change your substance use or your alcohol use. And what's really important to us is that we don't smash hope for people. So those models like the CHIME model and the social and emotional wellbeing model, we don't just explore them in programs. They're our benchmarks for how we do things. So if an activity is not hopeful, we know we need to change the activity. If it doesn't strengthen your connection to self or identity, then we need to change it. If it's not strengthening your connection to culture, subculture, or whatever culture means to you, then we're not doing it right. So we look at the stage of change model like this as steps, and we just say, look, if you have a lapse or a relapse, you're just falling down the steps a bit. And everyone's journey is different, and there's no right and wrong. But what's really important is that you recognise your progress. And it's the same as recovery. Like it's all over the place, but it's incredibly helpful for us to look back and go, we were talking about this earlier today. I mean, I knew from my 20s that I was always going to have these pretty significant crisis episodes, but I wanted it to have less impact on me as I got older, and it does. It has. I've not knocked out of the workforce for months at a time anymore. Had a particularly bad 2023, the breakdown of my marriage, which caused me to take, there were periods where I was out for like 9 days, but then within about a year, it was like 1 or 2 days. So I'm taking what's not that different to what someone would be taking for the flu or something like that. So we can also kind of relate the stages of change model to mental health recovery. Even it's that process of taking ownership of what's going on in your life and then just getting on and living your best life. But want to make sure, I'm going to skip this one. No, I'm going to play this one. I don't want to keep you because I can see fatigue. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm struggling to
Oh, no, you're doing a great job.
Sure. It probably takes a smaller work and very little bit.
Sound.
Oh, what have I done?
Yeah, and so the near-death experiences were really quite frightening. And my life was chaotic, out of control. And I felt whilst I was in the midst of addiction, very useless. I couldn't do anything. I never tried to stop until I get stopped. My emotional habit started 4 years ago when I walked into it, already had, and even though I went back a few times after that, I've never tried stopping Ross or doing it.
77. And then the 77, like I just kept wanting to kind of like finish the weekend. I don't know, get over it. Like I only doing the drugs like I used to. Oh, I didn't get fire like I used to. It was just, and then I went to search for more and better jobs. I learned about it. And so yeah, I knew that there was something better out there. And also the way that I got treated in jail was real effective for one of to get straight and treated. The other day was the people who don't have this. I think I was really surprised by the positive ripple effects of friends and people I know in my store was making moves to get clean. And it just pushed me.
I think that peer support offered me hope. The community interaction as to what different methods of we get access to. I tried developing CSM, the Sinclair method. I've tried that was known as Illinois. Environmental health recovery groups, chancellor. And those style of things, and sort of addressing the research for. A willingness to try and drop into life with.
I wanted to be clean, but I knew that during my life learning that she and I long for life was the moving life of it into but that I don't know what yeah. Anyway, just wanted to get rid of all that from my life.
This is lesson that I was giving this year to operate with the help our leaders. Also to ask for help. And that was much higher than the language program because I thought I could try to be religious myself. I didn't really try. Tried different methods along the way. So I found something that worked for me.
I believe I'm one of the people that that will always stay in love with the was a lifetime user and I don't consider myself any more special than anyone else. And that if I'm going through it with anyone in here, of course, you can find me in my opinion. My name's pretty well known around the obstetric. And yeah, I alongside everything for years. At 12 months or something, and I thought that I'll never get longer than that, and here I am, just keep going, if you can do it, if I can anymore, just keep going, really, just really keep going. You really don't give up, don't give up on yourself, you know, it's yourself.
Yeah, Rocket's kicking some goals. She works for a she's a national advocate now for the justice system. She's known all around Australia. He's a rocket though, I'll tell you.
Yes.
Yeah.
He came down last time.
She was? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna skip. These can all be watched online on our YouTube. You can watch the full 40 minutes of those guys talking, and we'll finish with a little bit. I've touched on this earlier. Families, there's one stat here I want you to know. The value of time and support and advocacy and helping their loved one to navigate the system just for mental health carers, not even for carers of people who have addiction as well. They did an economic study. It's $13.2 billion. It's 1.7 times what is spent on every mental health service in Australia. And so, like when I would go and, run information sessions for clinicians, that's really important that they understand that because they don't treat families with necessarily the respect and the knowledge and the recognition of their role. The stats around, families of people with alcohol and drug related issues are less clear. I know we have a lot of trouble connecting with those families. The way that they internalize stigma is really high. But yeah, can talk from my personal experience, plus having run our program, having run the programs for Recovery Together and Circles of Support, how abundantly clear it to me that families need their own support. I'm just going to skip a little bit because I want to talk a bit more about what the programs are like and make sure you get to go on time. So it is a balance of learning, adult education, we call it. Well, it is, where we see our role as translators of evidence-based research. And it's important that we translate that in ways that are engaging, fun, and that people want to come back to. And so that's part of the learning. The other part of the learning comes from the people in the group. And I learn every time I facilitate a group from the different people in the group. I learn things that support me on my recovery. And they're sharing and learning from each other is pretty profound. And Bronwyn, do you want to just pass over? So I'll show you in a little bit. So that little duvar, no, is there something in there? We already passed it over. Yeah, so we do like a lot of discussions around concepts, and so to just so every group, like when we ran the program in here, we had all of that back wall and the walls covered with butcher's paper, which recorded our table discussions. And so we go away and type that up. So each group gets their own book of knowledge, which is what they discussed during the program in relation to recovery. So that's not just a point of pride. It's also like something that actually gathers the group's lived experience perspectives. And then they also, all of that information will feed into specific recovery plans as well. And they're given copies of recovery plans. So if they want to go and do that work and do like an early warning sign, an early intervention plan, they can do that. Or if they can take the group discussions, look at it from their perspective and write it up in the plan, which is got it all tabulated and they're in that yellow folder, and they can make a purpose-specific plan just for them about how to manage different parts of their health. And so, yeah, I wanted to show you that. We've talked a bit about the scrapbooks. We talk about, we're exploring these evidence-based on there. You can see the butcher's paper up on the back wall there in that little video. We talk about some kind of core theme of the program is building the self-awareness of our participants. So that's knowing oneself, what matters to them, what they need, and building their ability to regulate. So what helps and what they can do and how they can get their needs met. So that CHIME model and social and emotional wellbeing model are really important, but there are actually a lot of other, pretty good, there's a heap of other pretty good stuff in there as well. And I would say the stuff that we do around, thinking right now, automatic negative thoughts, relationship defaults, how to communicate effectively, the values. Well, I've got the values cards there. So understanding your values, what's important to you. So we'll talk about needs, boundaries, and goals, all starting from a position of values, because my values are different to Bronwyn's. And so my needs are going to be different and my boundaries are going to be a little bit different. But when I know what's important to me, then I'm in a better position to identify what my needs are and what my boundaries are, so that when I do something outside my boundaries, I know why that causes me shame. Or if someone crosses my boundaries, I know why that makes me angry or that makes me whatever. And then the next part of that is, how do I communicate that in a way that's effective and non-confrontational? And we also, as well as those things, we talk about rights. So one, people need to know they have rights because they often don't. They're not always informed about their rights. And two, once you know your rights, how can we arm you so you can use that knowledge? How can we give you some skills so your knowledge of your rights, you're in the best position to address an issue when someone has violated your rights, or, you need to have, you're looking to have needs met. And then, yeah, goals, the hopefulness. We're a bit funny about goals. We like to say we hate smart goals. But some people really love goal setting. But we look at goals in a few different, I think because you see in recovery plans, they're like, what are your goals? What are your goals? What are your goals? And you're like, well, I can't even have hope for the future or hope for recovery right now. It's very difficult to ask me about goals. But yeah, so it's a
goalpost for change.
yeah, that's true. That when we know what our values are, like this has been important for me, understanding my values, I make decisions based on my values. Because I through my 40 plus decade, or not 40 decades, but mid 45 years or whatever it is, I've learned each time I've set a goal and I haven't met it, it's destroyed me a little bit more. So I'm very adverse to setting them. But by knowing what's important to me, making decisions in response to that, that's been really helpful. Yeah. So we fully try to empower people to choose how they participate. Some people come to our programs just to have connection with community. They just want to be with community and be accepted. And that's fine. That's their right. Our only requirement is that people make a commitment to the safety of other people in the group. So we encourage people to contribute as little or as much as they want, to take breaks as they need. We very much encourage the creativity because it helps with regulation. And yes, so I might finish with a video, but could I get, because it helps a little bit with our data, can we do some feedback? Can we scan on a QR code the feedback form and maybe do it later or during the video, if that's okay? You know what that means? Yeah, so what I probably haven't explained that very well. How about we just watch the video and then we might email all the feedback form, hey? So I think you're struggling to stay awake. Yeah, I know, it's all right.
Think that, we all feel as though that we can listen. It's an important part of trying to help someone. But I believe that the most important part of listening to someone is that you believe what you've been told.
I would like to say to not ever give up hope, that you might have 99 for your service, but never get off anything or encourage to do this one person that does, and that's all that matters, even if it's in your entire career.
And promoting peer support, because the providers are often only in the picture for a very short time. It might be that they're only there for 1 hour a week, perhaps. So promoting sources of support, such as the environmental health group, the AA, anything that can have that person on a during the week for a long period of time.
Don't give up on people halfway through, don't, at the end, and we don't, when they're trying to get themselves out. So many times, service providers just abandoned me, and it made me feel like I was no good. And it really made me question my sense of self-worth and stuff. So, if you're in someone's life to help them recover, stay in that capacity, even if you can't stay in the capacity that you are. At least, don't abandon people. Don't abandon people, and don't judge the person before you walk in your shoes.
Rehab. I've done 6 months worth of rehab, and I felt that it was fantastic way to give myself a break. And so a period where I could discover, and research some support coming out of rehab. But rehab as a solution, it wasn't a great fit for me. It may be for some people. It's just not to judge, okay, and to perhaps think of it much as a disease. So, like if the person had cancer, you wouldn't be saying you just shake this off. You would be much more empathetic and understanding. And I think that's probably means, as you treated exactly the same way.
To try and be supportive, I think there's just gonna be a lot more focus on not isolating and hiding these discussions that need to be had these days. And to reach out.
I think just seek some information, as much information as they can, while to get clarification, to get very well researched, and factually ready. For advice, any advice that's opinion,
Someone out there.
it's just very good sense. Well sourced and factually correct.
Just do that for them. Tell them that you're there for them. Make sure they have your number, make sure they know where you live, make sure they know that anything about you anytime. And just give a strong support, listen for them. When they go through their stuff, they don't need you to tell them what they need to do. They do need someone to do that for them and be there all the time.
Again, I think it's been fair. But the biggest thing that's helped me is to learn how to protect my own mental health, and safeguard that, because with my mental health is deteriorating. That's of no help to anyone that I'm trying to support.
To try and not place judgment on their family and the ways they choosing to support their loved one. And it's a really tough, sensitive time and to be open-minded and not give too many opinions.
Don't be judgmental. Be there for them, be a support person. Yeah, you can bring all the ideas in the world, they're probably bored of it. Just be a friend. Yeah, be a friend and support them. You don't judge.
I think there is an epilogue of Rocket being Rocket. I'll stop sharing, stop recording. I know. One second and I'll have to stop the recording. I can't find it. Oh, it's